Thank you for inviting me. Thanks to Ron for reaching out. We had tried doing this a while back and the dates didn't work, so I'm really happy to be able to come and be here in person. It's my first time doing something in person for Métis Council for any engagements or anything, so it's really exciting to be back out and actually seeing people in 3D and not flat on my computer screen. So again, thank you for the invitation. Really happy to be here. Great to see everybody that I know from before, and to the new faces, nice to meet you. So, as Ron said, I'm president of the Kenora Metis Council. Kenora Metis Council is one of 4 councils in our region. We're Region 1 of the Métis Nation of Ontario. So our other councils are in Dryden, Atikokan, and Fort Frances. The councils are comprised of a president, a board chair, a secretary, a treasurer. We have a senator, which is the Métis equivalent of an elder in the First Nations. And then we have our councillors at large, youth rep, as well as a women's rep. Then our regional governance is, to compare it to a First Nations lens, to give, that's what a lot of people are more familiar with, is the councils would be similar to what a First Nations community is, where you have your chief of a First Nation. We also have a regional structure. We have a regional president, who is Teresa Stenland, and then we have, she supports our entire region, so the 4 councils. We are the Northwestern Ontario Métis community, which is comprised of the Treaty 3, Lake of the Woods, Lac Seul, and Rainy Lake, Rainy River traditional territory. So one of the really unique pieces for us is that we are the only, and I'll touch on this a little bit more, but we are the only Métis community that adheres collectively to a treaty. There is no other treaty in the world for a Métis or a half-breed community. So I'll get into that a little bit further, but we've recently created our own logo as well, which is on the screen. So for the Kenora Metis Council specifically, my catchment area, my citizens are everywhere from the Manitoba border, comprising up until the Fort Frances and Dryden boundaries. So Kenora, Sioux Narrows, Red Lake, and Ear Falls are mostly my areas. So the Métis, we're distinct. We're not, First Nations that, they don't have enough blood quantum to get a First Nation status card, or don't identify as First Nations. We're not, a subculture of anything. We're our own distinct Aboriginal people. We have a unique history. We have a unique culture, a unique language, and a unique territory. When you go around the roundabout, you'll see the 4 different languages. Chukontantesi, that's Métis. That's Métis. Métis is our language. So when we look forward to the Peace Park, that's where we're really hoping that Métis is recognized there as well. It is really important, and that's something we've had talks with the City of Kenora as well, is to really include Métis more in the signage. So the Métis homeland is determined by the Métis National Council, is northeastern BC, some of southwestern Northwest Territories, all of Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and then Region 1 of the Métis Nation of Ontario, or Northwestern Ontario. There is absolutely no deviation from that being, those territories being the homelands of the Métis. Now, MNO and some other Métis governments are saying that the homeland does extend further down to the Great Lakes and more southeastern into Ontario. So Métis Nation of Ontario, we have 9 regions, and in those regions we have rights-bearing and non-rights-bearing communities based on whether or not they were part of the historic ties to the Métis communities. So a Métis person, you have to self-identify as Métis. You are distinct. So we often have, not often, but there has been Métis citizens who have their citizenship card who apply for and are eligible for a status card under their family's First Nation status. You cannot hold both. You are either First Nation or you're Métis. You're not both. It's very distinct. And so you're historic Métis ancestry, and you have to be accepted by the Métis Nation. So each province has their own registry and their own way of determining their citizens based on their historic root families and things like that. Ontario's is really incredible. Our registry, they've given us some presentations, and on one of the slides, you can see a little bit of how they've done it. But you can trace back to, you know, families sometimes back to the 1600s and all the way forward, and it's really incredible. So part of that, though, is that you have to be accepted by that Métis community. So it's not just saying, I have some Aboriginal ancestry somewhere and I have a European ancestry, so I must be Métis. That doesn't cut it. You actually have to have documentation, and you have to have those connections to a verified family line. So the Métis are descendants of Native American women, our First Nations cousins, aunts, grandmas, and the European men who came over to colonize Canada. It is a mixed ancestry, and it was the creation of a whole new Aboriginal people. From this came a whole new culture, a whole new language, a whole new identity for the Métis family. Sometimes the European men would be accepted by the First Nations family. Sometimes the First Nations women would be accepted into the European culture. But for those who chose to create this new way of life and this new Aboriginal culture, that was what the Métis people were. Okay, it's not going down. There we go. So some misconceptions about Métis. I've mentioned a few of them, that we're just a form of First Nations people, or that they're French Canadians. That's not true either. We don't have reserves or communities like First Nations do. There are a few in Saskatchewan, but generally speaking, we're urban people. We live in our towns, cities, communities. Part of our treaty adhesion, the signing, was that we were given land down in the Rainy River, Fort Frances area, and there were already families from a First Nation community residing on there. They had community members who had been born there, who had died there and been buried there. So the Métis did not want to uproot them from their land, and that's been something that since 1875 we've been negotiating with the government for land that is our own. We don't want to be taking our First Nations cousins' land away from them any more than we would want our land taken away from us. Métis don't pay taxes. That is not true. And Métis have no harvesting rights. That is not true either. I exercise my harvesting rights. I get firewood, I collect medicines, I collect plants for eating. I harvest large game, small game, fish for my family to live off of. Occasionally we'll do a community harvest and we'll have, a large fish fry, or if we have elders in our community, in our extended Métis family who no longer can get out and harvest for their own, we'll share our harvest with them. So that is part of our traditional Aboriginal culture, and that is something that, in order to have those harvesting rights for fish and wildlife, you do have to have a very distinct connection to a root ancestor in the area that you're harvesting in, and that your family always did harvest. So somebody who is a Métis from Saskatchewan can't move to Kenora and say, I'm Métis, I have harvesting rights in Saskatchewan, I'm gonna go out and shoot a moose for my family here. It doesn't work that way. Nor, I'm a Treaty 3 descendant, nor can I go down to Southern Ontario or Quebec or BC and say, oh, I'm gonna go out and get an elk today. It does not work that way. It's very specific to your traditional territory. So a little bit of the dry stuff population. There is a lot of Métis people in Canada. There's a lot of Métis people in Ontario. And predominantly, you can see by the stats that they are in urban areas. One of the things that oh, I think I deleted that slide. But when we look at our stats, is that for in my family example, my dad was one of 3 children. His dad was one of 16 children. Of my dad's siblings, him and his sister had 2 kids, his brother had 14. So out of the 18 of us in my first cousin's area, only about half of us have our citizenship cards. And then if anyone knows the Boucha family, they tend to like to have multiple kids, and there's quite a few of us running around. So as we start looking down at the number of offspring, there are a lot of the Boucha descendants who are Métis, who are eligible for citizenship, but have not applied. So that is one of the things that we're really encouraging, is we want people to be proud of their ancestry. We want them to become citizens, and we want them to become part of our community in that sense. You know, to be Métis, your culture doesn't take away, your language doesn't take away just because you don't carry a card. But there are a lot of other opportunities that by being a citizen, you do have opportunities that are available. You can vote in elections, you can attend our AGA, you can access services, health, schooling, some financial. We had COVID supports, things like that. So it's really important that if you think you may be Métis, or if you may have a spouse, or your children's partners are Métis, it's really important to keep those applications and those citizenships going, and to be a part of that larger community. So this is one of the root ancestor boards that we have several of them in our Kenora office, and it just goes through. On the right hand side you can see those dots there. That is what our registry has done, and it connects all the families. So I won't be able to zoom in enough to see, but Morisot is one of my family lines, and it's all the connections by kinship, by blood, by witnessing a wedding. If they were really close families, they may have lived in the same area, so they were witnesses to those weddings. They were witnesses to those births. And you can really see, it's like a spider web. It all interconnects, and it really goes to show that back in the 18 and early 1900s, you weren't alone. You were very connected, and it's really interesting because I look at some of the names on there, and then I start talking to some of the predominantly a lot of the First Nations people that I know, and we're actually distant cousins. And it's just that my ancestor married a European settler, and that's where my family line went, and theirs continued on with the First Nations. So it's really interesting, the genealogy part of it. And around here, the Métis were traditionally lake people. So they were the ones who were out on the lakes. They were the fishing guides. They were trappers. They were the lighthouse operators. They were the ones that were called out to help with search and rescues. So very connected to the lake and the land. Métis population shows some of the stats, and this is from 2016, and I don't have the most recent ones to update the slide, but our Métis population is booming, and our youth population is really increasing. And I think part of that is that we have some really incredible supports for youth who are going to post-secondary education, who are exploring careers in the trades, who are looking for a connection to their culture and the identity and learning about it. I'm just going to flip through a few of these. So the Métis Nation of Ontario was established in 1993, and there are other Ontario Métis organizations that have come up through the years and have come and gone, or there are some independent Métis communities as well throughout Ontario. The Métis Nation of Ontario does not govern those people. This is strictly for people who meet those registry requirements and are accepted by the Métis Nation of Ontario and who want to be a part of the Métis Nation of Ontario. We have a statement of prime purpose right here, and it expresses the values and the principles of the Métis Nation of Ontario, and it's guided by the principles that we want to really make a difference in the people within our own people, and that we want to make sure that our Métis citizens are reaching their highest potential. In every staff office, every desk, every staff member has this posted to remind them of their duties in their job and in supporting people. So yeah, the M&O registry is the only one recognized in the province. There's over 20,000. I think we're about 24,000 now. This slide's a bit outdated. And yeah, if M&O, all the children of all those registered, they anticipate that there would be about 46,000 citizens on our registry. I referenced the adhesion to Treaty 3. So Treaty 3 was signed in 1873. The adhesion to Treaty 3 was signed in 1875. The McPherson family, this is the father and his wife here. I believe George, and then that's his son and his bride on their wedding day, and then this is the daughter of the McPhersons. This is another one of my root ancestors, and he was actually the negotiator at the translator for the negotiator at the original Treaty 3 in 1873. So the Métis have a very strong connection to our First Nations cousins throughout our region. Here's some photos, mostly from our region and our committee meetings. Teresa Stenlin's the one on the left-hand side in that bottom picture with Honorable Carolyn Bennett at the signing of one of the agreements. Harvesting is a big part of Métis culture and heritage, and each region has a captain of the hunt. Sandy Triscoll is our captain of the hunt for Region 1. She is located in Kenora. She is also on Kenora Metis Council as our treasurer. She has the, she's the one that when somebody wants to apply for a harvesting card or renew their harvesting card, she needs to approve it. If somebody isn't following harvesting guidelines or if they have issues with the MNR, she's the one who gets involved. And she's also had some really interesting cases where the MNR has been involved with citizens who the MNR has identified as not harvesting within the guidelines of the Métis Nation of Ontario. And she's been doing some traditional circles with the MNR and with those individuals to bring awareness and importance and to really focus on our traditional way of resolving disputes back before there was police officers and courts in our community. So it's been a really interesting learning process for her. The annual survey goes out and all harvesters are expected to report that, and we work with the MNR. So when we are out on the land, we report back to the MNR on things that we see that may not be something that we find acceptable. We're stewards of the land. As much as we are out there harvesting for our own sustenance and our families and part of our culture, we're also making sure that the populations are staying sustainable for futures to come. We are making sure that if we see things that aren't legal or that aren't appropriate, that we're reporting them as well. We want to make sure that the animals, that the fish, that the trees, that nature is there for everybody. It's not just for the Métis people. We're stewards of the land for everybody. So there are community councils across the province. I believe we're up to 32 or 33. And the councils are different than the staff in the offices. We are all volunteers. We are all there to promote and put forward Métis' inherent right to self-government. And we are the ones who are the community linkages. So between myself and my council members, we sit on the All Nations Health Partners. We're on the All Nations Hospital Steering Committee. We sit on the Indigenous Education Committees for the school boards. We are involved in the Board of Directors for WinHack. We are, a lot of different, I'm trying to think of some of the ones that we're on, and I'm just drawing a blank right now, but we're very involved in the community and very involved in making sure that the Métis voice is heard and presented and considered, and that everything we do is done to empower the Métis, but never at the cost of anyone else. By no means do we want to make anyone feel shamed or disrespected or devalue anybody else's rights or freedoms or privileges. It's all about promoting the Métis right and doing it in harmony with everybody else. And I think the M&O now is up to about 250 across Ontario. So health, housing, education, training, lands and resources, community development. In Kenora, we have our healing and wellness branch. And through there, we have a Métis family well-being. We have a community wellness worker. We have an aging at home position. But then we also have other positions across the region, which also provide supports to our citizens in Kenora. So our education advisor is located in Atikokan. We have Healthy Babies in Dryden. So even though they may not be directly in our community, they will also support citizens throughout the entire region. So if you know of a Métis citizen who is having trouble with shoveling snow, having trouble with getting groceries, especially during COVID, it was really difficult. Our staff really made sure that whatever people needed, they were able to access. If there was funding that was available, they would make sure they knew about it and got the applications in. If it was rides for medical appointments, making sure that they had funds to pay their, if they had to go to Winnipeg for an appointment, making sure using through the travel grant, making sure that they had access to funds and hotels that were paid for so that they didn't have to not attend appointments because they couldn't afford upfront to pay for things. Housing is huge, and everybody in Kenora knows it's a really huge deficit, especially for our marginalized populations. And the prices of housing has skyrocketed. So that is something that I sit on a few different housing groups really trying to promote that housing is a very huge need across Kenora and our district. I'm just seeing if there's anything else. And I think that is pretty much all from the slide deck. There's a lot here that I could go through and share, but yeah, so we have our council, which is all volunteers. We have our staff in our offices. So if you know of anyone, reach out to the office, reach out to the staff, have them get the supports they need. MétisNation.org is the website. For anyone looking to apply for citizenship, the applications are on there. It's very straightforward and easy to fill out. And a lot of people say, well, I don't have this, I don't have that, I don't know if I connect. Registry is phenomenal, and with that database they have, they will then look at the application and send back a letter saying, thank you for your application, you're approved, here's your number, or thank you for your application, there's some missing information in your file. This is what we need. And they will be very specific in guiding applicants with what they need, or if it doesn't seem that they're a citizenship based on the registry, then they might redirect them. If they show that they have roots in Saskatchewan, our registry is Ontario, so they may direct them to another Métis government to apply for their citizenship. So some of the things that we have coming up in November, every November, we have our flag raising at City Hall for Louis Riel Day, and that is something that with COVID, it has shrunk a little bit, but usually our council is all there. We invite the school boards to bring some classes down with them. And we've had some pretty big turnouts depending on the weather. We've also had some really yucky weather and pretty hard to get any but the hardcore out. But anything like that, please feel free to come out and support our Métis community, learn more about it. We will be having a Métis Family Day in the fall, early fall, where I'll make sure that I send an email to Ron, and we'd love to have you all come out and learn more about the Métis, learn about the culture. The sash is one of the main symbols that people identify with being Métis. Our flag is another. The beadwork of the Métis people is absolutely incredible. So there's a lot that, you know, I'd be happy to have you come out and learn and participate in. And of course, we always have lots of food, so, you know, bring an appetite with you.